Talking with the experts.
Hello and welcome to Talking with the Experts. My name's Rose Davidson from rosedavidson.com, and Talking with the Experts is about all things business by business owners for business owners. And you can find it on all good podcasting streaming platforms and on YouTube. And today it's my pleasure to introduce you to Thomas MacKenzie. And Thomas has over 10 years of experience in cybersecurity and recently launched a startup that helps organisations with risk prioritisation. Nearly got it right. Welcome, Thomas. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, Ross. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so you've been in the cybersecurity, building and running large successful teams of ethical hackers. Is there such thing as an ethical hacker?
Yeah, there is. There is. In fact, it's one of the interesting things that's happening kind of within this industry right now is that like the ethical hackers are trying to reclaim the word hacker as a kind of an adjective for themselves. So actually utilizing the term ethical hacker probably isn't the correct terminology anymore.
Because hacker sounds like somebody from, that's in the naughty side of stuff.
From the movies, typically.
Yeah.
No, so there are ethical hackers. It's interesting because I thought the exact same thing. Like when I first started in my career, and I was always interested in IT and computers. And when I saw that the university that I went to were like providing cybersecurity training and like courses and degrees, and I started to like look into that world, I thought, you can get paid to do this? That's crazy.
Mm. So what do they do versus the other hackers?
So an ethical hacker, or the other term that is typically used, is the term penetration tester, which is a slightly strange name, but makes sense once you explain it. As a penetration tester, you are employed by organizations to assess the security of their networks, their applications, whatever it may be. I've been involved in testing everything from kind of banks to ships and cars and planes. And in fact, one particular engagement I did was for a Japanese company, and we tested a smart toilet system. Which was quite interesting.
Sorry for laughing, but yeah, it just sounds funny.
So yeah, we were as a kind of people, let's say, as a penetrationists as a whole, we're a super curious bunch. We like to understand intrinsically how things work, so that we can do things that they were never meant to do, really.
Yeah. That makes sense, but they should call them penetration or something. Like, find another word for penetration. Don't call them a hacker. It sounds bad.
Yeah. It's funny. The term hacker is kind of considered to be very American. If you speak to people in the UK where I am, they really don't like being called hackers.
No.
But this industry is very American, and it's kind of a term that's stuck over the years.
Yeah. Okay. I'll take your word for it. So your business is called Ranked Right, and you've grown it from you've led the growth of a business unit within a major blue chip company from 2 million to 15 million in 3 years. Wow, that's a big jump in revenue.
Yeah, so prior to starting Ranked Right, I worked at IBM, and within IBM, I led a team across Europe, Middle East, and Africa called. This is where it starts to sound like I'm faking everything. It was called X-Force Red, and basically it was a team of, when I joined, we were a team of about 30 to 40 people, and we grew that to about 80 people by the time that I left, and we were doing kind of engagements for some of the largest companies in the world, right? Like working at IBM, it was a really kind of interesting time in my career. But when I joined, that team was still relatively new within IBM, and 2 to 50 million sounds great, but the reality is that, people need kind of what we were providing. You have the IBM name behind you, and I'm not going to say it was easy, but it was certainly
interesting.
Let me tell you, it's certainly easier than it is now, right? I'm not going to be turning over 15 million doing this in 3 years.
So your business ranked right, which is like a really good name for a company. How would you advise other business owners, companies, whatever, to prioritise the vulnerabilities that they have in their organisation, and which ones would they fix first?
Really interesting and kind of difficult question to answer. Right, let me take a step back and kind of introduce the problem first. So, when the kind of .com bubble came around and the internet started to become a thing, people could kind of identify vulnerabilities in their environment by running various different tools. But back then, there weren't many vulnerabilities that were known. They were just being identified. It was the start of something new. So you could identify a handful of vulnerabilities. But now, I work with a bank about a year and a half ago that no matter how many, a global bank, no matter how many vulnerabilities they fixed in the kind of typical 1 month window that they run their scans, they would always have over 6 million vulnerabilities that they had left to remediate. And there isn't any way at all that an organization, no matter how much money they have, can go about kind of automating the remediation of 6 million vulnerabilities every month. It's just not possible. Not because, it can't be done, but mostly because if you remediated 6 million vulnerabilities, none of your machines would ever be online because they would always need restarting. And, there's a whole kind of risk profile that you need to weigh up when it comes to doing this type of stuff. So a number of companies kind of came around this time that providing this concept of vulnerability prioritization and basically building technology around it. And whilst I was at IBM, we partnered with a number of these firms and also provided services along this line as well. But one thing that really struck me, well, there was two pieces. The first was that everybody was providing this as a kind of a solution, utilizing these kind of secret algorithms that they'd come up with. So, they spent a hell of a lot of money gathering all of this data and building these elaborate secret algorithms that nobody truly understood. And the reason they do that is so that they can profess to have the best algorithm against their competitors, right? So that was the first thing. And then the second thing is that this was certainly a problem that only the enterprise could purchase a solution for. And I know from experience that, the mid-market and smaller businesses have this same problem as well. And in certain cases, it isn't just they don't have the money to purchase these products, but they don't also have the expertise. And if they can somehow find a way to piece together the amount of money that it would require to purchase one of these technologies, they would also have to hire a team of people to kind of run the technology as well. So, and coming back to your question, I myself and my business partner, we really saw that there was a need to provide a solution that would be one suitable for smaller businesses. So it wasn't, hundreds and hundreds of thousands, if not millions, right? I was involved in a project a few years ago post the WannaCry malware that was kind of propagated across the world. And I was working with probably one of the most well-known, I'll call it a brand, one of the most well-known healthcare brands in the world. And they were looking at solutions like ours in the range of $14.7 million per year. So there are two things in our mind. One, it needed to be suitable price-wise, and the second thing is it needed to be usable by everybody as well. So we kind of got to work in terms of trying to think what it was that we would do. Now, every business is different. Like every business has their own kind of risk appetite and the view of how they see the world. When I worked at Visa, as an example, I was in these the senior leadership meetings like once a month, and we would basically list kind of the number one risks that kind of we thought we were up against in that particular period of time. But if I then go to like my next company and we do the same thing, it was completely different. So my view was that these kind of secret algorithms didn't work, and what they did is they basically just upped the cost of the solution because they were paying for like hundreds of data scientists to gather all of this data. My view was that there are a number of organizations who know their risk really well. And if they don't know their risk really well, they're working with smaller kind of managed service providers that kind of can help them build kind of a risk, like a risk profile and like define their risk appetite. So what we're doing at Ranked Right is very different from others in the market, because we're not basically saying here is this secret algorithm. We're essentially providing a platform where we ingest all of the vulnerability data across your environment from various different tools and sources. We then correlate that with vulnerability intelligence from over 100 different sources, which we update kind of 4 times a day at least. And then we expose those data points so that organizations can say, well, I'm only focused on vulnerabilities that have been spoken about in the media in the last 7 days, or I'm only focused on vulnerabilities that have a working way of being kind of exploited, because you wouldn't believe how many vulnerabilities kind of are identified each day that nobody in the world knows how to exploit. It's just all theoretical, and people spend their time just focused on those. So that kind of explains our platform. If I then go a little bit deeper into how I would go about doing it, for me, it's all about ensuring that you take the number of vulnerabilities that you have and work it down to a number that is feasible for the size of the team that you have. I've seen a lot of kind of SLAs and KPIs that have been set by senior management in organizations, which are completely unrealistic, cause burnout, impact well-being. And, I think the statistics crazy, like over 80% of breaches occur due to human error, and the stress and the kind of pressure that's on these individuals to kind of fix these vulnerabilities. So my view immediately would be only focus on vulnerabilities that have working proof of concept exploit code, which when I was at IBM, of all of the data that we were seeing was like only 14% of the vulnerabilities that we had. I would then focus on areas of your environment or assets that were critical. So, if you're Visa, the most important part of your environment is the kind of payment processing and the clearinghouse kind of machines and assets. So make sure you focus on those first, and then start to have a look at like trends. So one thing that our platform does is, we may see a vulnerability that quite honestly has no real impact today, but based on the type of vulnerability it is and the historical data we have both publicly, we can say in 3 months' time, we can estimate that this is going to be a problem. And because it takes you on average 5 months to patch vulnerabilities on this particular computer, you should fix this now, or you should at least put it within your queue. So yeah, in short, Rose, it's not straightforward, but my belief is that organizations need as many data points as possible to be able to derive their own kind of risk into the way that they rank their vulnerabilities.
Well, how does one find out what their vulnerabilities are? I mean, how does the average business owner know that their computer systems, are vulnerable to hackers?
So a number of different ways. So it's a lot easier today than it was a few years ago. So a lot of things like antivirus, like software and kind of agents that you install on machines for other purposes, not security. they actually do go off and kind of identify vulnerabilities now as kind of part of like their ecosystem, if that makes sense. So you can utilize those kind of pre-existing tools that you have to do it. And I'm thinking things like Microsoft Defender and some antivirus software, and there are other kind of tools that you wouldn't consider to find vulnerabilities. So that's one way. The other way is penetration testing. So, dependent on your risk appetite and kind of the profile that you have, you will probably want or need to kind of consider the idea of pen testing. The way that we kind of explain that is it's, utilizing all of the tools and techniques that a hacker does, but within a controlled environment. The thing about penetration testing, though, is it's very much kind of a point in time assessment. And what you're doing is you're paying for an individual's time, right, to do that as almost a consultancy engagement. And as much as that's good because you're utilizing kind of their mind and the hive mind of their organization, if they're part of one too, to kind of find the latest and greatest ways of breaking into your business or breaking your product. One thing that doesn't do is it doesn't provide you with kind of repeatable, like sequential, regular kind of vulnerability data. And the way that you do that is by running vulnerability scans. And there are a number of different vendors out there. So the ones that kind of are the industry leaders are a company called Tenable, another one Rapid7, and another one Qualys. But there are smaller players. So we're partnering with a small business in the UK called Ronin, who are a new business as well. They do vulnerability scanning and, incredibly cheaper than the big players. And then finally, there's a lot of open source like vulnerability scanning tools and kind of processes that you can follow. So the main one is a tool called OpenVAS, and I'll be honest, it's the biggest pain in your rear end to get set up and get working. But once you've got it working, you're identifying vulnerabilities on the regular, right? And that then helps you with trying to work towards improving kind of the resilience of your business, because you can't protect what you don't know about, and it's really important that even if it's not the best, that you're doing something right. That's kind of the mantra. Getting the basics right is super important.
Yeah. So what sort of things should businesses be protecting themselves from?
The big one at the moment is ransomware, right? The ransomware is kind of rife. If you think of news stories recently, you got like the biggest one is Colonial Pipelines in America. In the UK, we've had a lot of universities fall victim to ransomware as well. So ransomware is certainly kind of big on the agenda that people should be focusing on, and really that then comes down to how can you focus on, how can you protect against that? So you have to assume that you're going to be breached at any given point. You have to assume that somebody's going to click on an email that they shouldn't, or give the password away for a critical system when they shouldn't. Because honestly, and I can tell you a load of stories where we've done kind of social engineering engagements where we've literally walked into the middle of kind of like a Fortune 50 financial organization, pretended to be somebody, let into their offices and being able to like plug into a meeting room, right? Like you have to assume that's going to happen. So then security is all about defense in depth. So what do you do if? So, make sure you have, some people would maybe disagree with this, but from a basic perspective, make sure you have antivirus installed, and depending on the size of your organization, ensure that you're doing kind of, the regular, not just penetration testing, but what's considered compromise assessments. Like, are you already compromised? Can we find indicators of compromise in your environment? Are you training your IT staff in cybersecurity so that they understand what to look for? So ransomware is one. Phishing kind of is in there as well, right?
Yeah, I know the big thing years ago was Trojans.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it hasn't changed much. Like, we're using kind of viruses and Trojans within the kind of ecosystem of phishing, right, is basically just a PDF file now that people click on and it installs a virus that propagates itself over the kind of network. But yeah, that's not changed. The big thing, in my opinion, is ensuring that your staff are aware of kind of what you expect of them, but you don't push it on them so much that they kind of become against you, and then assuming that you are going to be compromised, and trying to understand like what you would do. And like to give you an idea, like what we're doing in Ranked, right, even as a security firm, right, like it would be absolutely ridiculous of us not to kind of take that same approach of, we're going to be compromised. So, we have kind of retainers in place and like consultancy agreements in place with kind of incident response companies. And, we're ready for, and we have a kind of like a run book ready to go of, if this happens, this is what we must do. And it's really important from my perspective that comes right from the top of the organization. I don't know if it's the military across the entire world, but in the US, because I work with US companies more than I have UK companies, they have this kind of concept of commander's intent. And I really like the idea of commander's intent when it comes to incident response, because, as the owner of the business, you must be able to turn around and say, this is what I expect at this given point, and this is what we're going to do. And there's no better example of that than during the WannaCry outbreak. Maersk, the shipping company, were absolutely ruined, right? They were ruined. But their CEO came out, like literally right out in front, and said, we are going to do this, 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 and this publicly. And I mean, I've never seen a transformation happen as quickly as that. Like, they rebuilt their entire infrastructure, and bear in mind, Maersk are huge. They rebuilt their infrastructure in a matter of days. And having kind of that buy-in from the very top, now don't get me wrong, they have a lot of money and they were able to do it, right? But the point is that he was dedicated to security as a cause. And I think you're always going to be one step behind the curve if your leaders are not, is my opinion. And that is the most important thing. Make sure as a board, as a C-suite, as a leader, that you understand security and that you're on board with the mission of resilience.
Right. So is this all necessary for just a mum and dad business, or, just a solo entrepreneur, or is this more for the bigger sort of organizations?
This is where like threat modeling and risk modeling comes into play, right? So there'll be certain things that don't matter so much for these kind of like mum and dad shops, so to speak. But if we take if we take like this business, right, rosedavidson.com, if somebody was to kind of like hack your website and get access to some stuff that's on your website, you'd have to send out like an apology email and tell people and, say, sorry. But it wouldn't be so bad. The thing that would be bad is, if they did something that was, I once saw, as an example, a church in America, they were hacked. And basically the entire church kind of like website and all of the extra stuff that they had in terms of like the emails they were sending out, they were basically, the hackers just decided to just send porn out like to everybody on their mailing list.
Oh, God.
And it was like on their website and all of this kind of stuff. Now, look, it isn't the end of the world, but brand damage and honestly, like mental health is like a big problem when it comes to things, especially if you focus like all of your time and effort on trying to build this into, especially a church, right? So it all comes down to risk appetite, and this goes back to kind of something I was speaking to my brother about recently about university. for me, university has become a place where people go to have fun more than just go and learn so that they can go and have a job, right? And he said that you can. There's a university in the UK a few years ago that had like a media course that was focused for 3 years on the study of Harry Potter or something. And it was around the time that the UK like raised their university fees, and everybody was absolutely like crazy about it. And I just remember thinking to myself, and there's a funny story here, but I won't go into it. I remember thinking to myself, like, you should like consider going to university as an investment. And if you're not going to make the amount of money that you need to pay back your loan, you probably should think about doing something different. And it's the same for security. Like, is the impact that it's going to have on you worth the amount of money and the amount of time that you're going to spend? If you take online payments on your website and it's like 80% of your business, and if your website was to go down, can you survive on the 20% that's left? If no, then you need to do some investment in cybersecurity. So, as I said at the beginning, every business is different.
Yeah.
I would just make sure that you're aware of what's happening and those kind of basic steps that you can do to kind of improve your resiliency. So like antivirus and training and, not visiting stupid websites and ensuring you have SSL certificates and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, it's all very interesting, Thomas. Thank you so much for sharing all that. So where can people find you?
So you can find me on LinkedIn. My name's Thomas MacKenzie, MAC, not MCK. I am on Twitter, TW MacKenzie, I think. and then Ranked Right. So if you just Google Ranked Right, you'll see kind of our social stuff too.
And you've got a podcast, I see.
No, we don't have a podcast, but I've been on a few podcasts. I used to have a podcast. I used to have a podcast a long time ago. It was when I was a student, actually. We basically, a friend and I, we got drunk and just pushed our luck with like cybersecurity leaders. And, we were speaking to like directors at some of the largest firms at the time, having drunk copious amounts of alcohol like you do at university, right? And luckily I think there's only one recording left of those shows online.
Wow.
But no, we did some really cool stuff actually. So during this was back when like WikiLeaks was at its height, and a chap called Adrian Lamo leaked the identity of a private in the US military called, she was called Bradley Manning at the time, and now Chelsea Manning. We interviewed Adrian Lamo on our podcast, sober, by the way. We interviewed him before kind of any mainstream media were able to interview him.
Yeah.
And we did some really good stuff, but I don't do it anymore. No time.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Thomas. I've enjoyed chatting with you.
No, thanks very much for your time.
All right. Bye for now.
Bye.
Talking with the experts.